And we've seen that today with this Extinction Rebellion mob creating havoc in metropolitan Australia. By the way, I note that they call themselves an international movement that, quote, uses non-violent civil disobedience in an attempt to halt mass extinction and minimise the risk of social collapse. And apparently people swallow this alarmist rubbish, mass extinction and social collapse. They say we live in a toxic system. Well, we sure do, where behaviour like theirs is allowed. As I said, I was in Tokyo last week, it wouldn't be allowed there. But then the Japanese people have an unyielding respect for one another. This mob show no respect for anyone who might dare to object to their behaviour, let alone their ideology. Of course, they have a right to protest. They don't have a right to stop people going about their daily lives. And they don't have a right to force taxpayers to fund law enforcement authorities to keep their disgraceful behaviour in check. What do they want? Well, it's more of this global warming rubbish. No one denies climate change. The climate's been changing for years. This mob want 100% renewable energy, end land clearing because presumably the trees absorb carbon dioxide, and spread, quote, the science of climate change. It'd be anybody's guess what they know about any of this. One of the people arrested in Brisbane was arrested last week for the 7th time, which prompts the observation that there's something seriously wrong with law enforcement. In Sydney yesterday, police had to deal with protesters who locked their arms inside a giant pink water tank that was emblazoned with the slogans, water is life and rebel for life. Well, locked is a good word. Why aren't they locked up? Isn't that what the law is there for? Antisocial behaviour must be punished. It is everywhere else. And if you repeat that behaviour, that's what a jail cell is for. This mob are laughing at us. Or are we too frightened to do anything? I suspect so. Well, enter Malcolm Turnbull, echoing the language of the protesters and criticising the Liberal Party. One wonders why he's still a member of the Liberal Party. Says Turnbull, there's nothing conservative in denying the science of climate change. That's just denying reality. Well, for a start, I don't know anyone who denies climate change. As one of my listeners said today, we've had 6 or 7 ice ages. So to suggest that anyone's denying climate change is as dishonest as it gets. But Mr Turnbull and the Extinction Rebellion mob want the science of climate change to be spread. Mr Turnbull condemns those who deny the science of climate change. Well, Mr Turnbull, does that include the 31,487 American scientists who've signed what's called the Oregon Petition, which includes over 9,000 scientists with PhDs, which says there is no convincing scientific evidence of a climate catastrophe caused by carbon dioxide? As well, only last week, Europeans initiated and presented a petition to the United Nations which proclaimed there is no climate emergency. What do you say about these people, Mr Turnbull? But given that you always know more than anyone else, I suppose you presumably believe you are right and 30-odd thousand American scientists are wrong. But these lists represent the tip of a huge iceberg of scientific dissent. There is a stack of scientists who are completely ignored on this global warming hoax. Dr John R. Christie is a climatologist from Alabama. Quote, I've often heard said that there is a consensus of thousands of scientists on the global warming issue and that human beings are causing catastrophic change to the climate system. Well, I am a scientist, and there are many like me who think that is not true. Dr Charles Wax is a former president of the American Association of State Climatologists. He said, quote, first off, there isn't a consensus among scientists. Don't let anybody tell you there is. Stanley B. Goldenberg is a meteorologist at the US National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. Quote, it's a blatant lie put forward in the media that makes it seem there's only a fringe of scientists who don't buy into anthropogenic global warming. William Kinnenmonth, the former head of the National Climate Centre within the Australian Bureau of Meteorology, quote, climate science is not settled. 4 decades of observations highlight that computer models have exaggerated the influence of anthropogenic emissions of carbon dioxide. The Paris Agreement has been negotiated, he said, from faulty premises. Dr Richard Lindzen, the professor of meteorology at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, quote, what we will be leaving our grandchildren is not a planet damaged by industrial progress, but a record of unfathomable silliness, as well as a landscape degraded by rusting wind farms and decaying solar panels. Dr Robert Lachlan, a Nobel Prize winner for physics, quote, you can't find much actual global warming in present-day weather observations. Dr Kerry Mullis, Nobel Prize-winning biochemist. Quote, those people at the IPCC don't always tell you the truth. There's nothing in their contract, in fact, that makes it to their advantage to always tell you the truth. Dr. Madhav Kandekar, a meteorologist and an expert reviewer for the UN IPCC 2007 climate change report, quote, finding global warming in Canada and elsewhere is like the proverbial finding a needle in a haystack. I'm sorry to say, there is no global warming anywhere in the world today. Dr. Roy Spencer, climatologist and a former NASA scientist, echoing both the behaviour and the language of these protests, says, quote, this is the state of climate science today. If you support the alarmist narrative, you can exaggerate threats and connections with human activities, fake experiments, break government rules, intimidate scientific journal editors and make them resign, and even violate the law, as long as you can say you're doing it for the children, unquote. Well, the real scandal is that governments buy this global warming rubbish. Are they ignorant or duplicitous? There's only one way out of this calamity, because the country's going to go broke if we head down this track. Zero carbon dioxide emissions, 100% renewables. And don't forget, this mob want to give nature legal rights. Get your head around that. Only one way out of this. Let's have a royal commission to establish the truth. Then watch the activists' head, as one listener said today, explode at the mere suggestion. They would riot and launch a jihad to try and have it shut down. They would quite accurately, my listener said, see it as an attack on their new religion. Well, someone's got to have the guts to stand up to this lot, and in the Liberal Party, to stand up to Malcolm Turnbull. We can't survive this nonsense much longer. We already have the spectacle of Queensland closing down ahead of time. As I said to Peter just then, the Callide B coal-fired power station. Is Liddell going to close in 2022? Vales Point in 2028? What happens to your Lorne, Gladstone, Araring, Loy Yang A, Tarong, Bayswater, Loy Yang B, Mount Piper, Stanwell? We're talking tens of thousands of megawatts of electricity to be potentially closed down to accommodate this global warming hoax. And can you tell me one political leader, apart from Senator Canavan and John Barilaro, who have dared to open their mouth against this rubbish? As I said, I just returned from Tokyo. They don't talk this stuff on renewable energy and climate change. Japan's pushing ahead, as I said, with 37 new coal-fired power projects, more than any other developed country in the world. And, of course, they can't get enough of our coal. In an interview with the Australian newspaper last year, Japan's ambassador to Australia, Sumio Kusaka, said Japan would defy calls by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change to phase out coal by 2050. I might add there are also, as I said, 42 nuclear power plants in Japan. You don't hear the left-wing lovies calling for Australia to lift the ban on nuclear energy. Make no mistake, as a consequence of the crisis in political leadership, this country's in a mess. And you've only got to look at people like Malcolm Turnbull to know how we got there.